The banging on my front door at 5 in the morning pulled me from the deepest sleep I'd had in months. For a moment, I thought it might be another emergency with Mom. At 83, with Alzheimer's progressing faster each month, she'd become unpredictable. Sometimes she wandered. Sometimes she fell. Sometimes she forgot how to turn off the stove. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I stumbled down the hallway in my robe, my joints protesting after spending another night in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. The knocking grew more insistent, almost frantic. Through the peephole, I could see Fred Martinez from next door, still in his pajamas, his gray hair wild and his face streaked with what looked like tears. Fred was 77, a widower like me in many ways, though his wife had died from cancer rather than simply forgetting who I was one terrible day at a time. We'd been neighbors for almost 15 years. Ever since I moved back to take care of Mom after Dad passed. Fred had always been kind, bringing us vegetables from his garden, helping with small repairs I couldn't manage while juggling teaching and caregiving. But lately, Fred had been different, forgetful, confused. Sometimes I'd catch him talking to his roses as if they were people. Last week, he'd knocked on my door at midnight, convinced that burglars were in his house. When I went to check, I found only shadows and his own reflection in the windows. I opened the door to find him shaking, his pale blue eyes wide with terror that seemed completely real, even if its source might not be. "Arthur, thank God you're awake," he whispered, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "You can't go to work today. Promise me you won't go to work." "Fred, it's 5 in the morning. What's wrong?" He looked over his shoulder toward his own house, then back at me with an expression of such desperate fear that my stomach clenched. "Just trust me. Don't go to work today. Something terrible is going to happen." I'd seen Fred confused before, but this felt different. This felt urgent in a way that cut through my exhaustion and made me pay attention. What kind of terrible thing? I can't explain it right now. My head gets mixed up when I try to explain. He pressed his palms against his temples, a gesture I'd seen him make more frequently over the past few months. "But I saw them last night, and I know what they're planning." "Who did you see, Fred?" His eyes filled with tears. "I thought it was Michael at first, my boy Michael. But Michael's been dead for 8 years. His voice broke on the word dead, and I felt my heart squeeze with sympathy. Fred's son had died in a car accident, and I knew Fred still struggled with the loss. "Sometimes I see him," Fred continued, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes I think he's coming home, and I get so happy. But then I remember." And it hurts all over again. "Last night, I thought I saw him in your yard, and I was going to call out to him. But then I realized it wasn't Michael. It was someone else. Someone who looked like him from behind." I studied Fred's face, trying to determine how much of this was real observation and how much was his mind playing tricks on him. The problem with Fred's increasing confusion was that sometimes he was absolutely right about things, and sometimes he was completely lost in memories or fantasies. Learning to tell the difference had become a skill I was still developing. "This person you saw, what were they doing in my yard?" "They weren't just in your yard, they were near your car, doing something to your car." Fred's grip on my arm tightened. "And then they went toward the street, toward where you catch the bus to work." I hadn't driven in 3 years, not since Mom's condition worsened, and I couldn't risk leaving her alone with a vehicle. The morning bus route had become my daily routine, reliable and predictable. The same route I'd taken to Jefferson High School for the past 22 years, until my retirement became necessary when Mom needed full-time care. "Fred, I'm retired now, remember? I don't go to work anymore." His face crumpled with confusion, and for a moment I thought he might start crying. "But you have to go to work. Teachers go to work. You're a teacher." "I was a teacher. I retired 8 months ago to take care of Mom full-time." No, that's not right." Fred shook his head violently. "You go to work every morning. I see you leave. I wave to you from my kitchen window." There it was, the heartbreaking moment when Fred's reality and the actual world collided. I had established a routine of leaving the house every morning at 7:30, not for work, but to walk to the grocery store, the pharmacy, or the library. It gave Mom a chance to rest with the aide who came for 3 hours daily, and it gave me a chance to feel like a functional human being, rather than just a caregiver watching someone disappear one memory at a time. "Fred, I just go out for errands now. I don't have a job anymore." But he wasn't listening. His attention had shifted back toward his house, his body tense with anxiety. "They'll be back tonight. They always come back when they think no one is watching." Who comes back? The ones who hurt people, the ones who take things that don't belong to them. His voice dropped to a whisper. "They think I don't know, but I know. I've always known what Michael was really like." My stomach dropped. Fred had never spoken about his son this way before. Michael had been a successful businessman, married with 2 children, seemingly devoted to his aging father. But there was something in Fred's tone, something painful and buried, that made me wonder what memories were surfacing in his confused mind. "Fred, Michael loved you. He was a good son." "No." The word came out flat and final. "Michael was beautiful and charming and everyone loved him. But he hurt people. He hurt me. He hurt his mother before she died. And now someone who looks like him is going to hurt you." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the early morning air. Fred's confusion often mixed past and present, but the pain in his voice was absolutely real. Whatever he was remembering, whatever he was seeing, it terrified him. "What do you want me to do, Fred?" "Don't leave the house today. Don't go anywhere. Just stay inside with your mother and lock the doors." Part of me wanted to dismiss this as another episode of Fred's increasing dementia. But another part of me, the part that had learned to read the subtle signs of danger after 5 years of full-time caregiving, was paying attention to something deeper than his words. Fred wasn't just confused, he was genuinely frightened. And in his frightened state, he was trying to protect me from something he couldn't quite articulate but absolutely believed was real. "Okay," I said, "I'll stay home today." The relief that flooded Fred's face was immediate and profound. Thank you for listening to me. Most people don't listen anymore." He turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. "Arthur, your mother is lucky to have you. I hope you know that." "Thank you, Fred." My Michael, he would have put me in a home by now. He would have said I was too much trouble. Fred's voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo from somewhere very deep. "But you take care of people. You're a good man." I watched him shuffle back to his house in his slippers, his shoulders bent with exhaustion or sorrow or both. As I closed my door and turned the deadbolt, I wondered what Fred had seen, or thought he'd seen, that had frightened him so badly. From the bedroom, I could hear Mom stirring, making the small sounds that meant she was waking up confused and would need help remembering where she was, who I was, and why everything felt unfamiliar. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun come up through windows that looked out onto Fred's house. His kitchen light was on, and I could see his silhouette moving around, probably making his own coffee and trying to sort through whatever memories or observations had driven him to my door. At 7:30, my usual departure time, I watched Fred's kitchen window. Sure enough, there he was, looking out at my house, waiting to see me leave for work that didn't exist anymore. I stayed inside. The phone rang at 11:37 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was sitting at Mom's bedside, helping her with lunch, when the shrill sound cut through our quiet routine. Mom startled, dropping her spoon into the bowl of soup I'd been patiently coaxing her to eat. "Arthur Henley?" The voice on the other end was professional, careful, the kind of tone that immediately signals bad news. "Yes, this is Arthur. This is Detective Maria Santos with the Metro Police Department. I need to ask you about your family members. Do you have brothers or sisters?" My mouth went dry. 2 brothers, David and Robert. Why? Sir, I'm sorry to inform you that there's been an incident at 4215 Maple Grove Avenue. A gas explosion occurred this morning at approximately 10:15. The house was completely destroyed. The words hit me like physical blows. 4215 Maple Grove. The house where I'd grown up. The house where David still lived with his wife Karen and their teenage daughter Emma. The house where Robert had been staying since his divorce last year. Is everyone? Sir, I'm very sorry. There were no survivors. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor.
Mom looked at me with the confused concern she showed when she sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite understand what. Her hand reached for mine, a gesture of comfort that broke my heart because she didn't remember that she was my mother, only that someone near her was hurting. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Detective, I don't understand. How does a house just explode? We're investigating the cause, but preliminary evidence suggests a gas leak. These things can happen suddenly, especially in older homes. Mr. Hanley, I need to ask you some questions. When did you last speak with your brothers?" The question felt surreal. David and Robert were dead, their families were dead, and I was sitting in my kitchen, alive only because a confused 77-year-old man had begged me not to leave the house. I spoke with David yesterday evening. He called and said there was a family meeting this morning, something important about Mom's care. My voice sounded strange. Distant, like it belonged to someone else. What time was this meeting supposed to take place? 10 o'clock. David said it was urgent. He wanted me to come early, around 9:30, so we could discuss things before Robert arrived. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear papers rustling, probably notes being taken. "And why didn't you attend this meeting?" "My neighbor, he came to my door early this morning and told me not to leave the house. He was upset about something, said something terrible was going to happen." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Henley, we're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions, and we'll need to speak with this neighbor as well." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. My brothers were dead. David's wife, Karen, who had always treated me with polite distance. Their daughter, Emma, who was only 16 and had her whole life ahead of her. Robert's ex-wife, Sandra, might be relieved, but their son, Jake, would be devastated. The family meeting that was supposed to be about Mom's care. I'd been dreading it for weeks, ever since David first mentioned it. I knew what they wanted to discuss. They wanted to talk about putting Mom in a facility, about selling this house, about dividing up whatever assets remained after paying for institutional care. David had been pushing for this conversation for months. He'd made it clear that he thought I was wasting my life taking care of Mom, that professional care would be better for everyone. Robert had been more supportive, but I knew the financial strain was affecting his thinking too. Neither of them understood what it meant to watch someone you love disappear one memory at a time, to have the privilege of being the last familiar face in their shrinking world. Now they were gone, and I was alive because Fred Martinez, a man who sometimes forgot what year it was, had somehow known to keep me away from that house. I looked through the kitchen window toward Fred's house. He was sitting on his back porch, still in his pajamas, staring at his garden with an expression I couldn't read from this distance. I needed to talk to him, to understand what he'd seen or heard that had saved my life. Mom had dozed off in her chair after lunch, so I left her with the aide and walked next door. Fred's back gate was open, which was unusual. He was normally very careful about keeping things secure, a habit from his years as a bank manager before retirement. "Fred?" He looked up at me with eyes that seemed clearer than they'd been that morning, more focused. "Arthur, you stayed home." "Yes, I stayed home. Fred, I need to ask you about what you saw last night." His face immediately clouded with confusion and fear. "I don't like to talk about what I see at night. People think I'm crazy." I sat down on the step beside him, trying to make myself less threatening, more approachable. "I don't think you're crazy. This morning, you saved my life." "I did?" "There was an explosion at my family's house. My brothers are dead. If I had gone to the meeting like I planned, I would have died too." Fred stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. Then his eyes filled with tears. "I told you something terrible was going to happen. You did, and you were right. But I need you to help me understand how you knew." He was quiet for several minutes, his hands working nervously in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was very small. "Sometimes I see Michael at night, my son. I know he's dead, but sometimes I forget, and I think he's coming home." "What did you see last night, Fred?" "I was looking out my bedroom window, the one that faces your yard. It was very late, maybe midnight. I saw someone walking around your house, and at first I thought it was Michael coming to visit me." His voice broke slightly. "I got so excited, I started to open the window to call to him. But it wasn't Michael. No, when he turned around, I could see his face in the streetlight. It was someone else, someone younger. But he had Michael's build, Michael's way of moving. That's why I got confused. What was this person doing around my house?" Fred's hands started shaking. "He was doing something to the side of your house, near where the gas meter is. He had tools. He was working very quietly, very carefully." The words hit me like ice water. Someone had been tampering with our gas meter. But our house was fine. The explosion had been at David's house, 4215 Maple Grove. "Fred, are you sure it was my house, not another house?" He looked confused again, that lost expression that meant his memory was getting tangled. "Your house, the blue house with the white trim, the house where the teacher lives. But my house was gray with black trim." The blue house with white trim was David's house, 6 blocks away on Maple Grove. Fred's confusion was mixing up locations, but his observation might have been accurate. "Fred, after you saw this person, did you see them go anywhere else?" "He walked away toward the street. Then he got into a car, a dark car, and he drove away." "Did you recognize the car?" Fred was quiet for a long time, his face scrunched up with the effort of trying to remember. "I've seen that car before. It comes to visit sometimes, but not recently, not since Michael died." "Someone who used to visit Michael?" "Yes, someone Michael worked with. Michael brought him to dinner once, maybe 2 years before the accident. They talked about business things, money things." Fred's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't like him. He had mean eyes." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Michael had worked in real estate development, a field that attracted both legitimate businessmen and people who operated in gray areas. If someone from Michael's business life had been involved in what happened to my family. "Fred, did you ever hear this person's name?" "Marcus. His name was Marcus." Fred's voice was suddenly very clear, very certain. Michael called him Marcus. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Brennan, my ex-brother-in-law, David's business partner in a property development company, the man who had been married to my sister Linda until their ugly divorce 3 years ago. Marcus, who had access to David's house. Marcus, who knew about the family meeting. Marcus, who had every reason to want my brothers dead after they'd cut him out of several profitable deals following his divorce from Linda. I sat on Fred's porch steps, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across his garden, and realized that my confused 77-year-old neighbor had witnessed a murder, multiple murders. And somehow, in his deteriorating mind, he'd confused the location, but retained enough clarity to save my life. The police would want to speak with Fred, but Fred's testimony would be problematic. A man with advancing dementia who sometimes confused his dead son with strangers, who mixed up addresses and time periods, would not make a convincing witness. But I believed him, and more importantly, I was alive because I'd believed him when it mattered most. I looked at Fred, who was now humming softly to himself and pulling weeds from between the porch boards with the methodical patience of someone who had found peace in simple tasks. "Thank you, Fred." He looked up at me with a smile that was completely present, completely lucid. "You're welcome, Arthur. I'm glad you listened to me." As I walked back to my house to call Detective Santos with Marcus Brennan's name, I realized that Fred had given me more than just a warning. He'd given me the truth. Now I had to figure out how to make sure that truth would matter. Detective Santos arrived at my house 2 hours later with her partner, Detective Williams, a soft-spoken man who seemed to specialize in making people feel comfortable while they revealed their darkest secrets. They sat in my living room, notebooks open, while Mom napped in her chair nearby, mercifully unaware that her world had just become much smaller. "Tell me about Marcus Brennan," Detective Santos said without preamble. "He was married to my sister Linda until 3 years ago. Nasty divorce. He and my brothers had a business partnership that went bad around the same time." "What kind of business?" "Property development. They bought old buildings, renovated them, sold them for profit. Marcus had the construction connections, David had the financing expertise, and Robert handled the legal paperwork." I paused, remembering arguments I'd overheard during family gatherings. After the divorce, my brothers accused Marcus of skimming money from projects, cut him out of future deals. Detective Williams looked up from his notes. "Did your sister Linda have any ongoing relationship with Marcus?" "No. Linda moved to Phoenix after the divorce. She wanted nothing to do with any of us, honestly. Said we were all too entangled in each other's business." The irony wasn't lost on me. Linda had been the smart one, getting as far away from family drama as possible. "When was the last time you spoke with Marcus?" I had to think about that. "Maybe 6 months ago. He showed up here one evening, asking if I'd heard from Linda. Said he needed to discuss some legal matters with her. I told him I didn't know how to reach her." "How did he seem during that conversation?" "Angry, bitter. He kept talking about how my brothers had stolen years of his life, how they'd destroyed his reputation in the construction industry. I remembered the conversation more clearly now. He said something about how they'd pay for what they'd done to him." The detectives exchanged glances. "Mr. Henley, we're going to need to speak with your neighbor now. Is he available?" I looked through the window toward Fred's house. He was still on his back porch, but now he was talking animatedly to someone who wasn't there. One of his episodes. "He might be having a difficult moment right now. Fred has dementia. Some days are better than others. We still need to hear what he has to say." We walked next door together, and I could hear Fred's voice before we reached the back gate. "No, Michael, you can't take that. It belongs to Mrs. Patterson." He was holding a garden trowel protectively against his chest, addressing empty air. "You always take things that don't belong to you. That's why people don't trust you anymore." Detective Santos approached slowly, her voice gentle. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Detective Santos. We'd like to ask you some questions." Fred looked at her with confusion, then at me. "Arthur, who are these people? Are they here about Michael?" "They're police officers, Fred. They want to know about what you saw last night." "I don't like talking to police. They never believe what I tell them." Fred's voice became smaller, more defensive. "They think I'm crazy because I sometimes see Michael." Detective Williams crouched down to Fred's eye level. "We believe you saw something important. Can you tell us about the person you saw near Arthur's house?" Fred's eyes darted between the detectives and me, uncertain. "It looked like Michael, but it wasn't Michael. Michael is dead." "What was this person doing?" "Working on the gas thing, the metal box on the side of the house." Fred's voice gained confidence as he focused on the memory. "He had tools, professional tools, like Michael used to have." "Had you seen this person before?" Fred nodded vigorously. "He came to dinner once. Michael brought him. They talked about making money from old buildings." His face darkened. "I didn't like him. He looked at our house like he was figuring out how much it was worth." "Do you remember his name?" "Marcus." Fred said the name with distaste. "He told Michael that old people like me were wasting good property. Said I should sell and move to a retirement home." Detective Santos made a note. "Mr. Martinez, you said you saw this person working on a gas meter. Are you certain it was Arthur's house?" Fred looked confused again, his certainty wavering. "The blue house, the house where the teacher lives." "Arthur's house is gray, Mr. Martinez." Fred's face crumpled with frustration.
Sometimes the colors get mixed up in my head, but I know what I saw. Someone was doing something they shouldn't be doing. After the detectives left, I stayed with Fred on his porch. He seemed exhausted by the interview, drained by the effort of trying to organize his fragmenting memories into something coherent.
Fred, when Michael brought Marcus to dinner, did they talk about anything specific? Michael was always talking about money, how to make more, how to get it faster. Fred stared at his hands. After his mother died, he changed, became harder, meaner. What do you mean? Fred was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Michael hit me sometimes, when he got frustrated, when I couldn't understand what he wanted, or when I forgot things. Tears started rolling down his cheeks. He said I was becoming an embarrassment, that I was too stupid to live alone. My heart broke for this gentle man who had spent years hiding his son's abuse, making excuses, protecting a reputation that didn't deserve protection. That's not your fault, Fred. Michael said if I ever told anyone, he'd put me in the worst nursing home he could find, said I'd die alone and forgotten. Fred wiped his eyes with shaking hands. But Michael died first, in that car accident. And sometimes, I think maybe God was protecting me. Did Marcus know about how Michael treated you? Marcus laughed when Michael got angry with me. He thought it was funny when I got confused or scared. Fred's voice hardened with a clarity I rarely heard from him anymore. Marcus said old people were burdens on society, said families would be better off without them. A chill ran down my spine. Marcus Brennan, who had been systematically excluded from my family's business dealings, who harbored deep resentment against my brothers, who believed elderly people were burdens, had been working on gas meters in the middle of the night. That evening, after Mom was settled for the night and the aide had gone home, I sat in my kitchen going through old family photos. I found what I was looking for in a box of pictures from David's 50th birthday party 3 years ago, just before everything fell apart. Marcus Brennan stood next to David in front of the blue house with white trim on Maple Grove Avenue. He had his arm around David's shoulder, both of them smiling, both of them looking successful and confident. In the background, I could see the gas meter on the side of David's house, clearly visible and easily accessible. But there was something else in the photo that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the picture, barely visible, was Fred's car. Fred had been at David's birthday party. He'd seen Marcus at the house multiple times, had watched him interact with the family, had observed him studying the property with calculating eyes. Fred's confused testimony wasn't just about one night of criminal activity. It was about years of observation, years of watching Marcus Brennan case my family's vulnerabilities while pretending to be a trusted friend and business partner. I called Detective Santos and told her about the photo, about Fred's previous interactions with Marcus, about the pattern of abuse that suggested Marcus viewed elderly people as disposable obstacles rather than human beings deserving of protection. Mr. Henley, we've been doing some research on Mr. Brennan. He's had financial troubles since the divorce, lost his construction license last year due to safety violations, been evicted from his apartment twice. So he's desperate. And he's angry. We found some interesting posts on his social media accounts, lots of complaints about your family, threats that were probably intended as jokes but read differently now. What happens next? We're getting a warrant to search his current residence and vehicle, and we're going to need Mr. Martinez to make a formal statement despite his condition. After I hung up, I walked back to Fred's house. His kitchen light was still on, and I could see him through the window, sitting at his table with a cup of tea, looking more peaceful than he'd seemed all day. He saw me coming and opened the door before I could knock. "Arthur, I've been thinking about what happened today." "What have you been thinking?" "I know people don't trust what I say anymore because my brain doesn't work right. But I want you to know that I remember Marcus very clearly. Even when everything else gets fuzzy, I remember people who are cruel." "I believe you, Fred." "Good, because there's something else I didn't tell the police." Fred's voice dropped to a whisper.
The night I saw Marcus at your house, it wasn't the first time I'd seen him recently." "What do you mean?" "I've been seeing him drive by my house for weeks. Always late at night, always slow, like he was watching something. I thought maybe I was imagining it, because sometimes I see Michael's car too, and I know that's not real. But this was different? This was real. And Arthur, I think he was watching both our houses, figuring out our routines, learning when we were home and when we weren't."
Fred's eyes were completely clear, completely present. I think he was planning something bigger than just one house explosion. I felt my knees go weak. If Marcus had been surveilling both houses, if he'd been planning to eliminate witnesses to his crimes. Fred, I think you saved more than just my life today. Maybe, but I couldn't save your brothers. I'm sorry about that. You did what you could. You tried to warn me, and that warning kept me alive. Fred nodded slowly. Sometimes being crazy has its advantages. Crazy old men notice things that other people miss. As I walked home, I realized that Fred Martinez, despite his failing memory and increasing confusion, had been the most reliable witness to Marcus Brennan's criminal planning. His dementia hadn't made him less observant. It had made him less dismissive of threats that seemed impossible or unlikely. Tomorrow, the police would arrest Marcus Brennan for the murders of my brothers and their families.
Fred's testimony, combined with physical evidence and Marcus's documented grudges, would put him away for life. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be alive, and grateful to have a neighbor who cared enough about my safety to risk seeming foolish or crazy. Sometimes, the best protection comes from the most unexpected sources. 3 days after Marcus Brennan's arrest, I was going through David's personal effects that the police had released to me as the surviving family member. Most of it was routine paperwork, insurance documents, and business files. But in a locked drawer of David's desk, I found something that made my hands shake. A folder labeled Arthur's Situation contained documents that revealed a conspiracy I never could have imagined. The first document was a psychological evaluation report, supposedly documenting my increasing instability and inability to provide adequate care for Mom. It was signed by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychologist I'd never met, dated just 2 weeks ago. According to this report, I was suffering from caregiver burnout so severe that I posed a danger to both Mom and myself. The second document was a petition for emergency guardianship, filed by David and Robert, requesting immediate removal of Mom from my care and placement in Sunset Manor Nursing Home. The petition cited the psychological evaluation and claimed I had been isolating our mother from family support systems while exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. The third document was a real estate assessment of Mom's house, estimating its value at $450,000. Someone had written notes in the margins about quick sale strategies and minimum acceptable offers. But it was the fourth document that truly devastated me. A handwritten letter from David to Robert dated 1 week before the explosion. Robert, Arthur is becoming more suspicious about our plans. The psych eval should be enough to convince a judge. But we need to move fast. Marcus says he can handle the Arthur problem permanently if the legal route fails. His exact words were, "Accidents happen to people who live alone with gas appliances." I think he was joking, but maybe we should consider all options. We've waited too long to claim what's rightfully ours. Mom won't live forever, and Arthur has already wasted too much of our inheritance on his martyr complex. I read the letter 3 times before its full meaning sank in. My brothers hadn't just planned to steal Mom's house and force her into institutional care. They had discussed having me killed when I became an obstacle to their plans. Marcus Brennan hadn't been acting alone. He'd been hired by my own brothers to commit murder. And the family meeting they'd called for that morning? It hadn't been about Mom's care. It had been about finalizing their conspiracy against me. Marcus was supposed to eliminate me. Then David and Robert would proceed with their guardianship petition and property seizure. Instead, Marcus had killed them all when something went wrong with his original plan. I was alive not just because Fred had warned me to stay home, but because Marcus had decided to kill his co-conspirators rather than honor their agreement. Perhaps he'd decided he didn't want to share the proceeds from Mom's house. Perhaps he'd grown tired of taking orders from men who looked down on him. Perhaps he'd simply enjoyed the power of controlling who lived and who died. The phone rang while I was still processing this revelation. "Arthur?" It was Fred's voice, but he sounded different, older, weaker. "Fred, are you okay? I need you to come over. There's something important I have to tell you, but I'm having trouble remembering it clearly." I found Fred sitting in his living room, surrounded by photo albums and loose pictures scattered across every surface. He looked exhausted,
as if he'd been awake all night searching through memories. "Arthur, I've been trying to remember everything about Marcus and Michael and your brothers. My head gets so confused, but I know there are things you need to know." I sat down across from him, noticing how frail he looked compared to just a few days ago. The stress of police interviews and dredging up painful memories seemed to have accelerated his decline. "What have you remembered, Fred?" "Michael brought Marcus here more than once, not just for dinner. They had meetings in my basement, sometimes late at night." Fred's hands trembled as he picked up a photograph. "I thought it was business meetings, but now I think they were planning things, bad things." "What kind of things?" "Insurance fraud. They talked about making buildings have accidents so the owners could collect money." Fred's voice dropped to a whisper. "And they talked about old people. How old people with valuable property were problems that needed to be solved." My stomach turned. Did they mention specific old people? "Your mother. They knew she owned that big house, knew you were taking care of her. Marcus said it was a waste for one sick old woman to live in such valuable property." Fred's eyes filled with tears. "Michael said you were the obstacle, that your brothers wanted to do the right thing, but you were too stubborn to listen to reason." "When was this, Fred?" "Before Michael died, maybe a year before the accident." Fred struggled to organize his thoughts. "But Marcus kept coming back after Michael was gone. He used my spare key that Michael had given him. I'd hear him in the basement sometimes, going through Michael's old files." "You never told anyone?" "Who would believe me? A confused old man saying someone was sneaking into his house? The police would have thought I was imagining things." Fred picked up another photograph. This one showing Michael and Marcus standing in front of a burned building. "But I wasn't imagining it. Marcus was using my basement to store documents about insurance claims and property values, including information about your mother's house." I felt sick. Marcus had been planning this for years, using Fred's house as his base of operations, while Fred's own son participated in schemes that targeted vulnerable elderly people. "Fred, do you still have any of those documents?" "I threw them away after Michael died. I didn't want anything of his in my house anymore." Fred's voice broke. "But Arthur, there's something else, something I remembered this morning." "What?" "The night before Michael's car accident, he came to see me. He was upset about something, crying. He said Marcus was getting too dangerous, too willing to hurt people for money." Fred wiped his eyes. "Michael said he wanted out of their partnership, but Marcus threatened him, said if Michael tried to leave, he'd tell everyone about the insurance fires they'd set together." "So Michael was trying to get away from Marcus?" "Yes, and the next day, Michael died in that car accident." Fred looked at me with eyes that were suddenly very clear, very present. "Arthur, I don't think that accident was an accident." The pieces were falling into place in a way that made me feel physically ill. Marcus Brennan had been running insurance fraud schemes with Michael Martinez for years. When Michael tried to break away, Marcus had killed him. Then Marcus had continued using Fred's house as his base while planning to eliminate elderly property owners, starting with my family. My brothers hadn't hired Marcus to kill me. They'd simply made themselves useful to a man who was already planning multiple murders.
And when they became inconvenient or demanding, Marcus had eliminated them too. Fred, you need to tell the police about this. I tried to tell them yesterday, but they said I was confused. They said Michael's accident was investigated thoroughly and ruled accidental. Fred's voice carried a deep sadness. No one wants to believe that someone would kill their own partner for money. The detective I've been working with will listen. Detective Santos takes you seriously. Will you call her? I get so mixed up when I try to explain things on the phone. I called Detective Santos from Fred's kitchen while he continued sorting through photographs, trying to piece together years of observations that his failing memory had fragmented but not erased. Detective, Fred has remembered something important about Marcus Brennan and his son Michael. Mr. Henley, we appreciate Mr. Martinez's help, but his testimony is problematic due to his condition. We have solid evidence against Brennan for your family's murders. We don't need to complicate the case with older allegations. But what if Marcus killed Michael too? What if this pattern of murder goes back years? There was a pause. What exactly is Mr. Martinez claiming? I explained Fred's memories about the insurance fraud, the basement meetings, Michael's fear before his death, and Marcus's continued use of Fred's house after Michael died. Mr. Henley, even if some of this is accurate, it would be nearly impossible to prove. Michael Martinez died 3 years ago. Any physical evidence would be long gone. But if you searched Fred's basement, you might find something Marcus left behind. Another pause. We'll consider it, but I want you to understand that Mr. Martinez's mental condition makes him vulnerable to suggestion. Sometimes people with dementia create false memories to fill in gaps, especially when they're under stress. After I hung up, I found Fred in his basement, standing among boxes of stored belongings and pointing at a corner where the concrete floor looked newer than the rest. Marcus poured new concrete here after Michael died. Said there was a leak he needed to fix. Fred's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held a fear that seemed very rational. But there was never any leak in my basement. I stared at the patch of newer concrete, approximately 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. Fred, we need to call Detective Santos again. Arthur, what if they don't believe us? What if Marcus gets away with everything he's done? I put my hand on Fred's shoulder, feeling how thin and fragile he'd become. Then we'll keep telling the truth until someone listens. That's all we can do. Fred nodded slowly. Michael used to say I was too stupid to understand complicated things. But I understand this. Marcus Brennan is evil, and he's been getting away with murder for years. Looking at the concrete patch in Fred's basement, I realized that my confused, vulnerable neighbor might be the only person who truly understood the scope of Marcus Brennan's crimes. And despite his failing memory, Fred was still trying to protect people from a killer who had been hiding in plain sight for years. The question was whether anyone would believe us before Marcus found a way to silence the last witness to his long history of murder. Detective Santos called me at 6 in the morning, 4 days after our conversation about Fred's basement. Her voice was tight with urgency. Mr. Henley, we have a problem. Marcus Brennan made bail yesterday evening. I felt the blood drain from my face. How is that possible? He's charged with multiple murders. His lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Brennan was a long-time community member with no flight risk. The judge set bail at $2 million. Her voice carried frustration and concern. Someone posted it anonymously through a bail bond company. We don't know who, but Brennan is out. What about Fred? What about his safety? We've been trying to reach Mr. Martinez this morning to offer protection, but he's not answering his phone. Can you check on him? I was already putting on my shoes. I'm heading over there now. Fred's house looked normal from the outside, but something felt wrong. His morning newspaper was still on the front porch, and his kitchen curtains were drawn, which was unusual for him. Fred liked to watch the sunrise through his kitchen window while he had his coffee. I knocked on the front door and called his name. No answer. I tried the back door and found it unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells. Fred had become obsessive about locking doors since his dementia progressed, a common behavior in people who felt increasingly vulnerable and confused. "Fred, it's Arthur." I found him in his living room, sitting in his favorite chair with his hands folded in his lap. He looked peaceful, but there was something in his eyes that told me he was terrified. "Arthur, I'm so glad you're here." His voice was barely above a whisper. "We have a visitor." That's when I noticed the shadow in the doorway to the kitchen. Marcus Brennan stepped into the room, and I understood immediately why Fred looked so frightened. Marcus was holding a gun, and his face carried the cold expression of a man who had already decided to kill. "Arthur Henley, perfect timing." Marcus's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I was just having a chat with old Fred here about the importance of keeping quiet about things that don't concern him." "Marcus, you don't need to do this. You're already facing murder charges. This will only make things worse." "Worse?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Arthur, I'm looking at life in prison or the death penalty. There is no worse. There's only making sure that certain people can't testify against me." I looked at Fred, who was watching Marcus with the careful attention of someone who understood he was in mortal danger. Despite his confusion and memory problems, Fred was completely present in this moment, completely aware of what was happening. "Fred hasn't told anyone anything that could hurt you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Fred has told everyone everything. The police, the reporters, probably half the neighborhood by now." Marcus moved closer to Fred's chair. "See, Arthur, your crazy neighbor has been a problem for a long time. He's been watching me, following me, collecting information about my business activities. Fred has dementia. No one would believe anything he says anyway." That's what I thought too, until Detective Santos called me yesterday and said they wanted to search Fred's basement based on his allegations about my son. Marcus's face darkened with rage. "Michael's death was ruled an accident 3 years ago. Case closed. But now this senile old fool is dredging up conspiracy theories about insurance fraud and murder." Fred spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. "Michael was a good boy until you corrupted him." Marcus spun toward Fred, his gun hand shaking with anger. "Michael was weak. He got scared when we started making real money. Said he couldn't sleep at night, couldn't look at himself in the mirror." Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. "So I helped him sleep permanently." The casual admission of murder hit me like a physical blow. Marcus had just confessed to killing his own partner, Fred's son, and he was planning to kill both of us to cover it up. "The car accident was you," Fred said quietly. "Easiest thing in the world. Cut his brake lines, wait for him to drive down that steep hill on Riverside Road." Marcus smiled with genuine satisfaction. Michael always drove too fast. Everyone knew that. Perfect candidate for a single car accident. I could see tears forming in Fred's eyes, but his voice remained steady. "You killed my son. I put your son out of his misery. He was becoming a liability to both of us." Marcus turned back to me. "Just like you and Fred are becoming liabilities now. Marcus, listen to me. You can't kill both of us and make it look like an accident. Too many people know about Fred's testimony." "Who says it needs to look like an accident?" Marcus shrugged. "Home invasion gone wrong. Elderly man with dementia and his caregiver neighbor both shot by burglars. Happens all the time." I realized that Marcus had moved beyond caring about subtlety or planning. He was in full survival mode, willing to commit any crime necessary to avoid facing consequences for his previous crimes. "There's just one problem with your plan," I said. "What's that?" "I called Detective Santos before I came over here. She knows I'm here checking on Fred. If we both turn up dead 20 minutes after that phone call, you'll be the obvious suspect." Marcus's confidence flickered for just a moment. "You're lying." "Check my phone. The call log will show a conversation with Metro Police at 6:07 this morning." While Marcus was considering this, Fred did something that surprised both of us. He started talking to someone who wasn't there. "Michael, honey, you need to get away from that man. He's dangerous." Fred's voice carried the gentle concern of a father talking to his child. "Come sit with Daddy. We'll figure this out together." Marcus stared at Fred with disgust. "Still talking to your dead son, old man?" But I understood what Fred was doing. He was using his dementia as a weapon, making Marcus underestimate him while potentially buying us time. "Michael says you hurt him," Fred continued, his eyes focused on empty air beside Marcus. "He says you made him do bad things, and when he tried to stop, you killed him. Your son is dead, you crazy old fool. Michael is right here. He's telling me about the insurance fires, about the old people you hurt, about how scared he was before you murdered him." Fred's voice grew stronger, more authoritative. "My son says you're going to hell for what you've done." Marcus raised his gun toward Fred. "Shut up. Stop talking to dead people." That's when I saw my opportunity. Marcus was focused entirely on Fred, enraged by the old man's apparent conversation with his deceased son. I lunged forward, grabbing for the gun. Marcus was stronger than I expected, but I had desperation on my side. We struggled for control of the weapon while Fred continued his conversation with Michael, his voice providing a surreal soundtrack to our fight. "Michael says Arthur is a good man," Fred said calmly while Marcus and I wrestled. "He says Arthur takes care of people who need help." The gun went off during our struggle, the bullet shattering a window. The sound was deafening in the small room. But neither Marcus nor I released our grip on the weapon. "Michael says you should run away now," Fred told Marcus. "He says the police are coming." As if summoned by Fred's words, I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. Detective Santos had indeed taken my call seriously and sent backup when I didn't answer my phone. Marcus heard the sirens too. His face twisted with rage and desperation as he realized his plan was falling apart. He released the gun and shoved me backward, then ran toward the kitchen and the back door. I didn't try to follow him. Instead, I knelt beside Fred's chair to make sure he was unharmed. "Are you okay, Fred?" He looked at me with eyes that were completely clear, completely present. "I'm fine, Arthur. Michael helped us." "Fred, you know Michael wasn't really here, right?" Fred smiled, an expression of peace and satisfaction I hadn't seen from him in months. "Maybe not, but sometimes crazy old men know exactly what they're doing." Through the broken window, I could hear police cars surrounding the house and officers shouting commands. Marcus Brennan's brief taste of freedom was over. Fred reached over and patted my hand. "Thank you for believing me, Arthur. Thank you for listening when no one else would. Thank you for saving my life, multiple times." "That's what neighbors do," Fred said simply. "We take care of each other." As the police entered the house and began securing the scene, I realized that Fred Martinez, despite his failing memory and increasing confusion, had just outmaneuvered a calculating killer through a combination of genuine courage and strategic use of his own mental limitations. Sometimes the most vulnerable people are also the most dangerous to those who underestimate them. 6 months later, I was sitting in Fred's garden on a warm September afternoon, reading to him from the newspaper. The police had found Michael Martinez's remains in Fred's basement, exactly where Fred said they would be. Marcus Brennan had been sentenced to life without parole for 4 counts of first-degree murder, with additional charges pending for insurance fraud and racketeering. Fred's condition had deteriorated significantly since the confrontation with Marcus. The stress and trauma had accelerated his dementia, and most days now he didn't remember the details of what had happened. But he always remembered that I was his friend, and that seemed to be enough for both of us. "Arthur, did I ever tell you about my garden?" Fred asked, looking at the roses he'd tended for 15 years. "Tell me again, Fred." "I planted these after Michael's mother died. She loved roses, but she never lived to see them bloom." He touched a red bloom gently. "I've been taking care of them for her, keeping them beautiful so she'd be proud." She would be proud, Fred. They're the most beautiful roses I've ever seen. Fred smiled with the simple pleasure of someone who had found meaning in small, daily acts of love. When I'm gone, will you take care of them for me? Of course I will. The truth was, Fred had already made legal arrangements for me to inherit his house and property. He'd done this quietly, through a lawyer he'd known for years, back when his mind was clearer and he could make such decisions with full understanding of their implications. His only surviving relatives were distant cousins who had never visited or shown any interest in his welfare. "I want you to have the house," he told me during one of his lucid moments. "You understand what it means to take care of people who need help." Mom had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 months after Marcus's arrest. The stress of the family crisis seemed to lift something from her, and she'd had several weeks of unusual clarity before the end. She'd recognized me consistently during those final days,
Had remembered Fred's kindness, and had expressed gratitude for the quiet life we'd built together. "Arthur takes good care of people," she'd told Fred during one of his visits. "He's always been the best of my children." Now I lived in Fred's house, maintaining both properties while Fred spent his days moving between familiar rooms and spaces, content in the knowledge that someone was watching over him. We'd hired a live-in aide for the times when his confusion became dangerous, but mostly Fred was calm and happy, finding peace in routine and friendship. The settlement from my brother's estate had been substantial. Their life insurance policies, combined with the sale of their properties, had left me with enough money to ensure Fred received the best possible care while maintaining his independence and dignity. It seemed fitting that their attempt to steal Mom's house had ultimately provided the resources to protect an innocent man they'd helped in danger. "Arthur."
"Do you think Michael forgives me?" Fred asked suddenly. This was a question he'd been asking more frequently lately, and I'd learned that the truth was more important than comfort when dealing with his fears. "Forgives you for what, Fred?" "For not protecting him from Marcus, for not seeing what kind of man Marcus really was." Fred's eyes filled with tears. "A father should protect his children. I failed." "Fred, you did protect Michael. You tried to guide him toward honesty and kindness. You gave him love and support. Michael made his own choices about the kind of man he wanted to be. But I could have done more. I could have been stronger. You were strong enough to save my life. You were strong enough to make sure Marcus faced justice for what he did to Michael and my family." I reached over and squeezed Fred's hand. "You were strong enough to be the father figure I never had when I needed one most." Fred considered this, his confusion clearing for a moment. "You think I was a good father to you? I think you were the best father figure I could have asked for. You watched over me, warned me when I was in danger, and stood by me when no one else believed the truth." "That's what fathers do," Fred said with satisfaction. "They protect their children." That evening, after Fred had settled into bed with his aide nearby, I walked through both houses, checking locks and turning off lights. The routine had become meditative, a way of honoring the responsibility I'd inherited along with the property. In Mom's old room, which I'd converted into a library, I kept the documents that told the story of everything that had happened. Detective Santos had given me copies of the evidence against Marcus, including his confession to killing Michael. Fred's testimony had been crucial in building the case, and despite his dementia, he'd been remarkably consistent in his recollections of Marcus's crimes. "Mr. Martinez may be confused about many things," Detective Santos had told me, "but he's absolutely clear about what Marcus Brennan did to his son. That kind of emotional memory often remains intact even when other cognitive functions decline." I'd also kept the psychological evaluation my brothers had commissioned, the one that claimed I was unfit to care for Mom. Looking at it now, I could see it for what it really was, a document designed to facilitate theft and abuse, created by people who viewed caregiving as a burden rather than a privilege. The contrast between that cruel assessment and the reality of my life with Fred couldn't have been starker. Taking care of someone who needed help hadn't diminished me or trapped me. It had connected me to something larger than myself, something that gave meaning to ordinary days and transformed routine tasks into acts of love. Fred had taught me that protection and care flow both ways in real relationships. While I helped him navigate his daily challenges,
He had protected me from dangers I couldn't have imagined. While I managed his medications and meals, he had given me purpose and belonging in a world that had suddenly become much smaller and lonelier. On weekends, I worked in Fred's garden, maintaining the roses that connected him to his wife's memory. I'd learned that caring for growing things required patience, consistency, and faith that small daily efforts would eventually produce something beautiful. The neighborhood had changed since Marcus's arrest and conviction. People were more watchful, more connected to each other's welfare. Mrs. Patterson from across the street checked on us regularly. The Rodriguez family next door had started including Fred in their weekend barbecues. The community had rallied around one of its most vulnerable members, perhaps understanding that we all face the possibility of needing such protection someday. Fred still had moments of confusion and fear,
times when he didn't recognize where he was or forgot that Michael was dead. But he also had moments of pure joy, times when he remembered exactly who he was and felt proud of the life he'd built. During those clear moments, he often talked about feeling peaceful about his approaching death. "I'm not afraid anymore," he told me during one of our garden conversations. "I did something important before I die. I helped save a good man from bad people." "You saved more than just me, Fred. You saved future victims. Marcus won't hurt anyone else." That's what Michael would have wanted, for his death to mean something good. As autumn settled over our quiet neighborhood, I found myself thinking about legacy and meaning. My brothers had been intelligent, successful men who had ultimately chosen greed and manipulation over love and loyalty. Their legacy was destruction and betrayal, a cautionary tale about what happens when family bonds are severed by selfishness. Fred's legacy was entirely different. Despite his illness and vulnerability, he had chosen courage over safety, truth over convenience, and protection of others over self-preservation. His final act as a fully functional person had been to save a neighbor's life, and his ongoing presence in my world continued to teach me about grace, dignity, and the importance of caring for each other. On Christmas Eve, Fred and I sat by his fireplace, watching snow fall outside his living room window. He was having one of his clearer days, alert and conversational. "Arthur, I want to thank you for something." "What's that, Fred?" "For treating me like I still matter. For listening to me even when I don't make sense. For believing me when everyone else thought I was just a crazy old man." "You've never been just anything, Fred. You've been my friend, my protector, and my teacher." "What did I teach you?" I thought about that question seriously. "You taught me that taking care of people isn't a burden. You taught me that love shows up in small daily actions. You taught me that sometimes the people who seem most vulnerable are actually the strongest." Fred nodded slowly. "And you taught me that some children choose their parents instead of the other way around. Is that what we did? Chose each other?" "I think so. I think God knew we both needed a family, and He put us next door to each other so we could take care of each other." Outside, the snow continued falling, covering our shared world in peaceful white silence. Two old men sitting by a fire, grateful for warmth and companionship, protected by the knowledge that someone cared whether they lived or died. Fred fell asleep in his chair that night, and I covered him with his favorite blanket before heading home. As I walked across the yard between our houses, I looked back at his kitchen window, where a small light always burned to guide him if he got confused during the night. Tomorrow I would check on him again, and we would tend his garden together, and I would read to him from the newspaper, and we would continue the quiet work of caring for each other until one of us could no longer continue. It was a simple life, but it was a meaningful one. Fred had shown me that meaning doesn't require grand gestures or public recognition. Sometimes meaning is found in keeping roses alive for someone who loved them, in believing the word of a confused old man when everyone else thinks he's lost his mind, in choosing to protect rather than exploit the people who need our help most. The silent guardian had taught me that the most important battles are often fought in gardens and kitchens and living rooms by ordinary people who choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and each other over everything else.